Faith-based kids' TV shows started to gain popularity as far back as the 1960s, with one of the most renowned being Davy and Goliath, which premiered in 1961. This stop-motion style show centered around the main character Davy Hansen and his talking dog Goliath. During each episode, Davy would have to face some moral dilemma, and he would use religion to navigate his way through it. The show was a total hit, and over the years, several more religious-based TV series would arise. Shows like The Donut Man Show, Salty, The Songbook's Praise Parties, and Mother Goose Gospel, just to name a few. These shows were extremely popular within religious households, and there are likely many of you watching right now who have your own memories of these shows. And another very popular religious series was called Joy Junction, which first aired back in 1979. Sheriff Don was the host, and throughout each episode, the child audience would get to participate in various activities, and a large cast of zany characters would use scripture to teach lessons. The kids seemed to really love the interactive nature of the show, and they even had a puppet named Marty who the kids absolutely adored. The series ran for decades, with its final episode airing in 2005. But reruns of the show would continue to air until the early 2010s. And then one day, without explanation, the show disappeared from the network. And now, Joy Junction is rarely even talked about. In fact, aside from a few episodes uploaded by users here on YouTube, any trace of the show is extremely hard to find. But why would anyone want to scrub such a well-loved, popular kids show from existence? Well, there's actually a very disturbing reason this show has all but completely disappeared. Joy Junction had a predator on set, and this predator wasn't just lurking in the background either. This person was actually one of the most beloved characters on the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Summer Sanchez, and on this channel we talk about crime cults and heinous history. And today we're talking about a Christian TV show called Joy Junction and the very messed up story behind one of its most beloved characters. It's extremely bizarre, it's extremely creepy, and I do want to give a warning that this one is pretty hard to listen to at certain points. But before we get into the story, let's go ahead and briefly talk about today's sponsor. Thank you to Wild for partnering with me on this video. I think we all know about Wild at this point. They're known for their great smelling aluminum and paraben-free deodorants. Their deodorant is very effective, and there are so many great scents to choose from, many of which fall into the sensitive category. My two favorites currently are honey and cactus flower and coconut and vanilla. They both smell so good. They both have like a warm, sweet scent to them. Just trust me, if you have not tried those two scents, you need to add them to your list. And they glide on so nice and smooth, and like I said, they are effective. I don't have to keep reapplying deodorant throughout the day. The refill packaging is plastic free, and the deodorants come in these reusable aluminum cases, and there are so many cases to choose from as well. I have two of mine here. My green one stays here at home, and I also have this case with the little polka dots, and this is my on-the-go case. I keep this one in my backpack. And I've been eyeing this case lately. It's called Birds and Berries, and it's so cute. Anything with a forest or nature theme, I absolutely love. Aside from the amazing smelling scents that Wild offers, the refillable cases are my favorite thing about this company. I do try to make environmentally friendly choices as often as I can, and I never really realized just how much waste we accumulate from packaging alone. And Wild doesn't just make deodorants, they also offer body wash, hand wash, and lip balm. I have a few of the lip balms, and they're made with shea butter and coconut oil, and they're very light on the lips. You know, they don't feel like super thick and heavy. It's just a very nice light feeling. And they also come in reusable containers, and as you just saw, it's super easy to refill. It takes like 10 seconds. And because of their commitment to sustainability, Wild has already managed to save more than 1.6 million pounds of single-use plastics from landfills, which is amazing. And for a limited time, Wild is offering my viewers 20% off all products when you click the link in my description box and use my code SUMMER. You can also get there by scanning the QR code on the screen. Thanks again to Wild for partnering with me on this video, and now let's get into the case. Joy Junction was a Christian TV series that first aired in 1979 on CTN, or Christian Television Network. Joy Junction was the name of the make-believe town that the characters resided in, and this show was essentially like a variety show. They would have a live audience made up of mostly children, and throughout the 30-minute episode, children from the audience would be asked to come up and answer questions and participate in various games. The show was created by Don McAllister, who also played the main character in the show, Sheriff Don. Sheriff Don was the host, and he would be in charge of refereeing the various activities throughout the show.
So now it is 40-10. Blue side, you still have the lead. Does the Bible say we should not use bad language? Yes or no?
Yes.
Absolutely it does, yes. In fact, the puzzle we had just a few minutes ago, Ephesians 4:29 says, don't use bad language. Yes, that's certainly what the Bible tells us.
They had another character named Professor Clodhopper, played by Forrest Padley. Professor Clodhopper was an inventor, and he was always creating like crazy new contraptions, and he was also known to be a little bit scatterbrained.
Let me show you. Something. Look here. Look here.
Oh, Professor.
See, it opens up.
You took your yardstick and you cut it up into chunks.
Right, see? Opens up.
And you put a bolt in it.
Right there. See, look at that.
And
see, I can measure long things now.
Well, Professor, we got a problem here, Professor.
This has got a hook on it.
Huh?
Well,
straighten it out.
I got 1 through 12 inches here, and I got 13 through 22 inches here.
There was Ron and his puppet Marty, played by Ronald William Brown. Marty the puppet was supposed to be a young boy, and Ron would always be offering up advice and, helping him navigate his way through the troubles that kids sometimes have. And Ron would use the Bible as a reference for the advice.
Marty, as I was thinking of, just as we use the telephone to talk to our friends, it's also a fact that many times the Lord wants to talk to us. He doesn't have a telephone, though. Oh, no. He doesn't have a telephone, but he does call us up in other ways. Really? How? Well, he can talk to us through his word, the Bible. That's right, God's word.
Then there was Whittler Dan, played by David Brantley, and Whittler Dan was like a hillbilly uncle who's always telling stories.
That I remember, his name was Johnny, and he had a little different way of approaching the whole thing. He says, he says, when I walk by a watermelon patch, he says, my mouth won't stop watering. But he says, I can sure make my feet run the other direction. And that's when it talks about going the wrong path.
Pastor Wilson was played by Joseph Smith, and he was the Joy Junction pastor, and he would come in throughout the episode with a word from the Lord.
She was so heartbroken, and I had to just comfort her. So I read a particular scripture to her that just happened to have right here, and it's in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3. And it goes like this.
Papillon was played by Al DeSanto, and his character was the resident artist in Joy Junction, and he would use his drawings to illustrate that episode's biblical lesson.
When you reach a certain point, when you follow everybody, you end for destruction over here.
Mr. Papillon.
Repent and turn is what God.
Repent really means turn around.
That's right.
And that's what you're drawing. It's the whole crowd, the human race, walking towards the road of destruction. But if they'll just accept Christ and turn to him, make that turn, they'll march up to a heavenly home.
Way how to get there.
Deputy Les was played by Les Padley, and he was Sheriff Don's right-hand man. They had one woman on the show, and her name was Darcy Wilson.
Before I forget, here's Darcy Wilson to sing We Will Walk.
Blessed are the people who know the joyous sound, who walk in the light of his countenance.
And they also had at least one child actor on the show named Sarah Edens.
Hi, Sarah. You don't look very happy today.
Guess I'm not.
Anything I can do?
No, not really.
Sarah, are you okay? Listen, you look like you don't feel too good. Maybe if you talk about it, it'll help.
Maybe. It's my friend Kathy. Her parents separated and she's all mixed up.
And the main point of the show was to teach biblical lessons in a child-friendly way. For example, there was one episode that centered around bad language, and throughout the episode, each of the characters would use their own unique style to teach the children why using bad language is so sinful.
And,
Now, let's see.
Yeah, any place special, maybe?
All right, let's just take close by, make sure it works. How about trying the Joy Junction schoolyard?
Okay.
They're arguing.
Oh, yeah.
That's not yours? Hey, that's mine. You're nothing but a...
Oh, wow.
What?
I don't believe what I just heard, Sheriff Don.
What, was it bad?
Oh, I don't know how they...
Kids.
Oh, it's kids, children. I don't know how they can say things like that, boy.
There's also an episode where they discussed dirty pictures, like if your friends try to show you a dirty picture, what you should do, which is kind of creepy to talk about on a kid's show.
And when I got over there, I noticed that some of the kids were kind of giggling and laughing, and I wondered why they were doing that. Well, why were they doing it? Well, they said, Marty, come over here and take a look at our pictures. So I walked on over there and I took a look, and do you know what it was? What was it, Marty? Well, it was in Arizona, I'll tell you that right now. Ron, they were looking at some dirty pictures and they wanted me to look too. Well, Marty, what did you do? Well, I said, look, guys, I like you a lot and I want to play with you, but I can't look at those pictures. I just can't do it. Well, what did they say, Marty? They said, oh, Marty, come on. Your parents are in the house. No one will see. Well, what did you say? I said, that may be true, but I know someone who will see, and that's God. That's right, Marty. You know, that kind of reminds me of a verse I'm thinking of in the Bible that's found in 2 Timothy 2:22. And it says that you should run away from anything that will give you evil thoughts. And as your companions, you should have friends who have pure and clean thoughts.
The show originated in Clearwater, Florida, but it eventually was picked up by TBN, the Trinity Broadcasting Network, and this gave the show a broader reach, which could be an entire video on its own. There are tons of controversies surrounding TBN. And like I said, the show was a major hit, especially within religious households. Children from all over the world would tune in each week to see what the Joy Junction characters were up to, and to hear that week's spiritual lesson.
Oh no, Sheriff Don. Look what's coming. It's the grapevine.
And listen, I am an 80's baby, so I know all about bizarre children's shows. I grew up watching shows like Pee-wee's Playhouse, which I was obsessed with. Fraggle Rock.
To get to the trash heap, you have to go through the Garden of the Gorgs.
Fraggles!
And does anyone remember Beekman's World? It was a science show for kids where Beekman and his assistant Josie and a rat named Lester would do experiments and stuff. And for a science-loving kid like me, it was like the best thing ever. Plus, one of the main characters was literally a man dressed as a giant rat. Anyways, you could write in and ask Beekman a science question and they would answer your question on the show.
Dear Beekman, what is the world's most remarkable fish?
Answer. It's a fish called the plaice. The plaice disguises itself from its enemies by changing the colors and patterns on its body to match its surroundings.
I personally wasn't into religious shows when I was a kid, but during the research for this case, I came across some wild ones. One of the wildest being Salty the Songbook's praise parties. And I just want to know whose idea it was to make a songbook a mascot. This is horrifying.
Servant of all? What does that mean, Salty?
It means, preacher, that if we want to be someone great in the kingdom of God, we need to first learn to become servants of the Lord and servants to other people.
Joy Junction ran for 26 years and the final episode aired in 2005. But reruns would still air on TBN. But in 2012, Joy Junction went off the air for good. No explanation, no announcement. It was just there one day and it was gone the next. The network no longer wanted any association with the Joy Junction brand because one of the cast members had been hiding an extremely dark and sinister secret. And in 2012, that secret was revealed to the entire world. The downfall started in 2010 when Homeland Security investigations launched Operation Holit. This operation centered around identifying victims of CP, and it started in Boston, Massachusetts, but eventually it expanded internationally. Agents would scour image after image, paying especially close attention to any items that might be found in the background. They would then use the clues from those background items to try to pinpoint where that image may have originated from. The operation kicked off with the arrest of a 47-year-old man named Robert DeDuca. Robert was a Sheraton hotel manager in Milford, Massachusetts. He was married with 3 children of his own, and he was also a predator with a sick obsession with babies and very young children. And he had amassed an extensive library of CP. Robert would engage with other pedophiles online, and these pedophiles would exchange CP images with one another. And one day, Robert made the mistake of sending one of those images to an undercover agent posing as a predator in the forum. And after a forensic search of his devices, he was found to have more than 20,000 images and videos of CP. Agents decided to take a closer look at some of the images that they found on Robert's devices to see if they could figure out who some of these children were. And they noticed that in some photos photos of a young boy, there was a stuffed bunny. It's a stuffed Miffy for those who are familiar, and investigators managed to pinpoint the part of the world where this particular bunny was known to be a popular toy item, which was the Netherlands. Agents in the US contacted the agents in the Netherlands, and they confirmed that this bunny was popular there. Also, the sweater that the victim had on was unique to a specific store in Amsterdam. So on a hunch that the photo might have originated in the Netherlands, the agents released an edited version of the photo to the public to see if anyone recognized the victim. And within just a few hours, a person came forward saying that the boy in the image was their son. The perpetrator was a daycare teacher in Amsterdam, 27-year-old Robert Mikkelsen, and he had a massive library of CP, and he also confessed to sexually assaulting dozens of children during his time working at 2 different nurseries in Amsterdam between February of 2007 and January of 2010. In total, it's estimated that Mikkelsen has at least 85 victims.
One case that stands out in Operation Holit, of what we're all most proud of in the operation, is the beginning, where one image that depicted a very minor child holding a rabbit that was germane to the Netherlands. The victim was unknown to National Center for Missing Exploited Children, and an investigator in Amsterdam Police Department recognized that sweater the child was wearing and the doll was germane primarily to their country. And there was a decision made by the authorities to put that image out on national TV to try to identify the unknown victim. And within an hour or two, the grandfather of the victim called his daughter, and I said, "I think that's your son that's depicted there." And then soon thereafter, the Amsterdam police kicked down the door and they arrested Robert Mikkelsen, who worked at a daycare center in Amsterdam. And he had upwards of at least 87 victims over the years that he worked with children. And it was through the data and the open sources that we use led us to other violators.
And as Operation Holitna progressed, the team discovered that these pedophiles were using online Yahoo Messenger chat rooms to discuss their shared interest in children and exchange CP. And one of the chat rooms that they came across was especially disturbing because the users were talking about not only sexually assaulting children, but also killing and eating them. And within this chat, investigators found 120 CP images that all depicted the same 3 boys. And these images were horrible. I won't go into much detail about the photos, but I do want to mention 2 in particular because they're relevant to the cannibalism aspect of the chats. One of the images showed a young child, a toddler, who was nude and in a roasting pan inside of an open oven. And the other photo was basically the same image, except this time the oven door was closed. And so investigators are thinking that if they can figure out who these boys are, they might be able to find out who took these photos. And after meticulously combing through each image, they spotted a clue hidden in the background. There was a water bottle in the background of some of the photos, and the water bottle had a unique logo on it with the words Midwest Aquatics. And there was also a phone number that started with a 913 area code. This came back to a swim and scuba shop called Midwest Aquatics in Overland Park, Kansas. And so investigators head to Kansas and they started going to the schools in the Overland area in an attempt to figure out who these children are. And eventually some teachers at an elementary school in Johnson County were able to identify the 3 victims. They were 11, 8, and 2 years old at the time that the photos had been taken. And one of those victims was able to lead investigators to the person responsible. 38-year-old Michael Arnett of Roland Park, Kansas had been hurting children for years. Michael had been involved in the production and distribution of CP, and he would share that CP with fellow predators in that Yahoo chat room. And a major talking point within that chat was cannibalizing children. And that is why Michael had taken those photos of the toddler in the oven. He was sharing that photo with the other depraved members of the chat who also had fantasies of eating kids. All of the children were still alive, thankfully. Michael had not actually cooked any of them. And one of the boys was actually the son of one of Michael Arnett's close friends. They had been friends for like 15 years. And this little boy would spend weekends at Michael's house along with several of his cousins. The boy's mother said that she had no clue that any of this was going on. She completely trusted Michael Arnett. In fact, when police first told her what was going on, she didn't believe them. Michael had been doing this stuff for years, and I don't think that we'll ever know how many victims he actually has. He was arrested for the production and possession of CP, but it gets much worse. Once the news started reporting on Michael Arnett's arrest, one of his victims came forward with a horrific account of his experience with Michael. Michael, and another predator, 39-year-old Robert Poe III. So back in the late 90s, Michael had been a volunteer for a nonprofit that provided medical care and social services for children because, of course, he did. And part of his duties in the organization was to drive a van around to take the children to and from various locations to receive medical treatment or whatever else they needed. And this is how he met this particular victim. This boy, who was 10 years old at the time, had a brother who had cystic fibrosis. He was a cystic fibrosis patient. That's why they were involved in this nonprofit. And Michael saw an opportunity, and he used his position as a volunteer to gain the trust of the 10-year-old boy and his brother, and he started the grooming process. Michael talked to the boys, he pretended to care about the boys, and the boys eventually started to think of Michael as a friend, someone they could actually trust, which is exactly what Michael wanted. He was even eventually allowed to start taking the boys on little weekend getaways. And then after he had their full trust, Michael introduced them to a friend and fellow predator, Robert Poe III. And Michael Arnett is bad, okay? He is an awful, disgusting, horrific monster of a person. But according to the victims, Robert Poe was even worse because he was the more violent of the two. Once Michael brought Robert Poe into the picture, this is when the abuse started. And keep in mind that one of these boys is suffering from cystic fibrosis. The two men would occasionally take the boys for little weekend trips to Missouri and Oklahoma, and the abuse would happen during these trips. And Robert Poe was extremely violent with the boys. He would often hold a gun to their heads and force them to perform sex acts on him at gunpoint. These brothers were put through absolute hell, and they were terrified to tell anyone what was happening. And just knowing what Robert Poe is capable of, I'm going to assume that he was threatening the boys not to tell anyone. One of the victims later said that they grew up thinking that being sexually assaulted was just a normal part of life, which is unbelievably heartbreaking. And Robert Poe was found to be one of the people in that Yahoo Messenger chat with Michael Arnett. And the things that they discussed were horrific. They talked extensively about what they wanted to do to all these children, very young children. They wanted to abduct and torture them and then kill and eat them. Cannibalism was a major talking point in this chat room. Robert Poe was arrested in 2012, not long after Michael Arnett was arrested. And after the news broke about Robert's arrest, another victim came forward and said that Robert Poe had been his babysitter back in 2000 when he was only 7 years old. And he had done the same thing to this child. He had held a gun to his head and forced him to perform sex acts on him. Now, that child did actually tell his parents, and they did go to the police, but after a short investigation into the matter, police couldn't find any evidence that they felt was sufficient enough, and so nothing was done. And it's just so frustrating because if something would have been done back in 2000, so many other victims could have been saved from Robert Poe. So after Michael and Robert had been arrested, investigators just kept digging into that chat. They are one by one unmasking the people involved in that Yahoo chat group. And these people were spread out all over the United States. In November of 2012, agents arrested a 57-year-old New Jersey man named Robert Mucha. Robert had also been one of the people active in that forum with Michael Arnett. And when agents caught up with Robert, he had tons of CP on his computer. And he also ended up confessing to luring a 15-year-old boy across state lines so that he could assault him. And he also confessed to inappropriately touching hundreds of other children over the years. He had an erotic fascination with cannibalizing children, which is why he was involved in that chat group. 42-year-old Jason Scarcello from Anderson, California, and 67-year-old Richard Dates of Grant, New Mexico were also arrested in connection with that chat. Both Scarcello and Dates were found to have CP images and extremely disturbing conversations with Michael Arnett about plans to abduct, assault, then kill and eat children as young as 2 years old. And once they were caught, all of the men basically said the same thing regarding the stuff that they had said in those chats. They had never actually planned to abduct, torture, and eat children. It had all just been a shared fantasy that they would never have acted on. Robert Poe pleaded guilty to crossing state lines to abuse children, and he was ultimately sentenced to 235 months in federal prison. Michael Arnett was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison and 10 years of supervised probation. Richard Dates received a 10-year sentence and was paroled in 2021, but he got in trouble again when he was found with CP in 2024. And Jason Scarcello received an 8-year sentence. But investigators were not quite done. Amongst the pages and pages of chat logs found on Michael Arnett's computer, they came across another screen name that led them to this man, 40-year-old Jeffrey Portway. Jeffrey had been talking to Michael Arnett about kidnapping a child. He wanted Michael to kidnap a child and deliver them to him so he could imprison them assault them, torture, then kill and eat them. The others could claim that they would have never actually done the things that they discussed in that chat. But when police raided Jeffrey Portway's house, what they found told them that he was absolutely planning to carry out his fantasies. During the search of Jeffrey's home, investigators discovered a homemade, soundproof dungeon in his basement where Jeffrey planned to keep this kid imprisoned, doing unspeakable things to them before then killing and eating them. This was truly a house of horrors. Agents found a coffin, they found butcher's kits, scalpels, and castration kits in the dungeon. The news clip that I'm about to show you refers to a Kansas man who was asked to kidnap a child. That's Michael Arnett that they're referring to. He is the Kansas man.
A Worcester man has been sentenced to more than 26 years in a federal prison on child pornography charges. Prosecutors say Jeffrey Portway had more than 20,000 images of child porn. Authorities say he had asked a Kansas man to kidnap a child so he could torture the child and then eat and rape the child in a soundproof dungeon in his basement. Portway never got hold of any children, but he engaged in online chats with individuals about child porn and trying to get a hold of children. The soundproof dungeon was hidden between two locked doors in his basement, along with a child-sized homemade coffin.
And of course, they found tons of CP images on Jeffrey Portway's devices, and they found chat logs between Michael and Jeffrey. And in one of those chats, Jeffrey said, "That's all I have to live for. I'm serious. It's the only thing that gets me up in the morning." And he said this in reference to his plan to do all of these horrific things to a child. Thankfully, no children were actually harmed as far as we know, but there's no doubt that if Michael would have made good on his promise to kidnap a kid for Jeffrey, he would have followed through with his plan. Jeffrey pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 27 years in prison, but agents still were not done. There was one more person associated with that chat room, and this individual went by the screen name U.E. Lime. Investigators ended up going to Yahoo with a subpoena to obtain the information for the person associated with that screen name, and that led them to a 57-year-old man from Largo, Florida named Ronald William Brown. And if you look hard at this photo, you might recognize this man from the beginning of the video. Ronald William Brown was also known to thousands of children as Ron and the voice of the puppet Marty in the beloved Christian children's TV show Joy Junction. It turns out that Ronald Brown was a predator, and he had been having sick fantasies of doing horrific things to children dating back to his days on the show. And after his time on the show, Ronald had continued working with children. He was now living in a trailer park in Largo, Florida, and he would volunteer to do puppet shows at local churches where he would be surrounded by tons of young children. He also drove the church van where he would take children to and from church. And he owned a puppet shop called Puppets Plus, putting him in contact with dozens of children every single week. Some of Ronald's neighbors seemed to have a feeling that something was off about him even before he was arrested. He frequently had neighborhood children over to his house, and they would come over just to hang out with him. Sometimes he would give them a ride to and from church, and once a week, Ronald would buy a bunch of pizza and invite all the neighborhood kids over for a pizza party. And the neighbors thought that it was kind of weird for a 50-something-year-old man to constantly have all of these young kids over at his house, but they never could have imagined all of the sick fantasies that were constantly playing through Ronald's mind.
That kind of stuff is scary.
Stacy Gogan was disgusted but not surprised by the allegations, saying for years her neighbor has spent an unusual amount of time with children, the puppeteer taking kids with him to church, and also hosting pizza dinners at home for groups of young boys at least once a week.
They'd come with their bikes and their skateboards, and they'd hang out waiting for him to come home.
Just like the others, Ronald had fantasies of kidnapping and assaulting young boys. He also wanted to kill and eat young boys. But Ronald also had a fetish for dead children. He had tons of CP of children being bound and tortured, and he also had hundreds of photos of dead children. Investigators also discovered photos of a young boy who had attended Ronald's church. This boy's name was Andrew, and he had died of a brain tumor. And Ronald had in his possession multiple photos of the boy sick in the hospital and photos of his dead body at his memorial service. They also found a flyer for a missing child, and a blow-up sex doll dressed in little boy's clothing was also found in his trailer.
The 57-year-old puppeteer is accused of crimes against children. Authorities say Brown had pictures of boys with their hands and feet bound. Brown's already appeared in federal court where detectives say he admitted to chatting with another man online about cooking children and eating their remains.
I'm just very disgusted, and I think that's something really, this is just uncalled for. I want to see justice. I want to see justice.
And some of the chat logs between Ronald and Michael Arnett revealed that Ronald was obsessed with a particular young boy from his church, which was the Gulf Coast Church in Largo, Florida. This boy is only referred to as C in court documents, and Ronald would talk about C with Michael all the time. He would detail all of the terrible things that he wanted to do to him, and then ultimately killing and eating him. And in August of 2011, there was a text message between Ronald and Michael Arnett, where Michael asked, "Any luck with your boy?" And Ronald responded, "No, I still want to eat him though." And just keep in mind that Ronald is a puppeteer at this church, which is just creepy as hell. He is also driving the church van. He's coming in contact with tons of kids every single week. And all the while, he is planning and fantasizing about all of these horrific things. Ronald would sometimes secretly snap photos of C while they were at church, and he would send those photos to Michael Arnett. And together they would talk in great detail about what they wanted to do to C. They would talk about wanting to kill him, cook him, and eat him, and all the different ways that they would do this. And during one conversation, Michael Arnett described eating a 3-year-old girl. And just to be clear, no one has ever found evidence that Michael actually killed and ate a child, but this is just what he was telling Ronald. But in response to Michael describing eating this child, Ronald said, "You are making me hungry." There were also conversations where Michael would send CP images of children being snuffed by their abductors, and Ronald would talk about wanting to do the same thing to C and how hot it would be. I'm leaving out a lot as far as the conversations go because I just can't bring myself to say this stuff out loud. It's just too messed up. The chats are out there if you just really want to know exactly what was said, but I don't recommend it. And Ronald actually did correspond with Jeffrey Portway as well. Remember, Jeffrey was the one who had built the dungeon in his basement and wanted Michael Arnett to kidnap a boy for him to torture and kill. Yeah, Ronald is talking to him as well, and he's also sending him photos of C. Ronald was obsessed with this child. And investigators also discovered that Ronald had a profile on a website called cutedeadguy.net, and under the interest section of his profile, he wrote, "I love them young and dead. I enjoy them fresh, but I like to see them displayed in their caskets too." And he also wrote about how he had been interested in committing necrophilia since he was a child. And like I said, these fantasies had been going on for a very long time. Investigators found a journal where Ronald would keep a daily account of the children that he was coming into contact with and all of the sick fantasies that he had and what he wanted to do to these kids. And the entries started back in 1978, a year before Joy Junction first aired. So that means that during the filming of the show, as young kids were sitting around him, listening intently to what Marty and Ron had to say about Jesus, and, like not saying bad words and looking at dirty pictures and how it was sinful, all that time, unbeknownst to anyone, Ronald's brain was full of the most vile, depraved desires anyone could imagine.
You see these documents is from the United States District Court here out of Florida. There are details on these pages that I don't care if you're a grown adult, I'm not going to read them to you. They're just that stomach turning. These papers were filed in the arrest of this Florida man who used puppets to entertain children, birthday parties, schools, on television. He is Ronald William Brown, and he is accused of possessing child pornography and conspiring to kidnap a child. That's not all. He allegedly told investigators he had a fantasy about kidnapping, killing, and eating a boy from his church. The discussions he allegedly had online go way beyond fantasy. Investigators say they also found child porn and a missing child flyer in Brown's home. This is a guy, keep in mind, parents trusted enough to let their kids attend pizza parties at his house.
They're all probably passing his house every morning and every afternoon. And some parents aren't home from work yet, or some of them have left for work and they're sending their kids on and they're not knowing at all.
Not only that, video of one of Brown's TV appearances has now surfaced online. It is strikingly creepy in light of all of this. Take a look.
They said, "Marty, come over here and take a look at our pictures." So I walked on over there and I took a look. And do you know what it was? What was it, Marty? Well, it was in Arizona, I'll tell you that right now. Ron, they were looking at some dirty pictures and they wanted me to look too.
And it was later discovered that the local police had actually pulled Ronald over for a traffic violation years before his arrest. And during that traffic stop, the officer noticed that there was a pair of little boys' underwear wedged between the seats of the car. And when the officer asked why Ronald had children's underwear in his car, he claimed that they actually belonged to one of his puppets.
Check with the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office on that. They told me Brown's name has popped up in 3 reports, but none leading to an arrest. In one call, the Sheriff's Office tells me that during a traffic stop, a deputy spotted what appeared to be a child's underwear wedged in a seat. Brown told the deputy it was clothing for his puppet.
So were these underwear actually for one of his puppets? We do know that he did dress some of them up like children, or did they belong to a victim? We don't know. And as far as I can tell from the research, we have no proof that Ronald ever acted on any of his fantasies. But he still has victims. All of the children in the CP that he had in his possession, the unsuspecting kids at his church that he obsessed over, like C, and the poor child who had a brain tumor, and all of the neighborhood kids who thought of Ronald as a friend, when really he was just a very disturbed, twisted pedophile using them for his own sick pleasure. Ronald claimed that everything he said in the chat was just a fantasy and he would never actually hurt anyone. And in the end, he pleaded guilty to 8 counts of possession and receipt of CP, and he was given a 20-year sentence. Ronald William Brown died in prison in 2020 at the age of 65. And that is all I have on this case. Please let me know what you think about this one down in the comments. Had you ever heard of Joy Junction? Have you ever heard of any of the other weird faith-based shows that we talked about today? Don't forget to click the link in the description box or scan the QR code on the screen to get 20% off your wild order when you use my code SUMMER. If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing, liking this video, or leaving me a comment. That is the easiest way for you to support me and my channel. And as always, I appreciate each and every one of you for watching, and I will see you next time.